Chapter 28. When the dawn broke, it surprised him. The greyness seemed to fade away from the sea, and when the light came, it had a clear quality that illuminated the curve of Cardigan Bay. There was not a tanker or a ship to be seen. Instead, there was a layer of grey-blue on grey-blue at the horizon that looked like an abstract painting. Nearer, there was dew on the grass near the Land Rover, and a fresh, if slightly chilly, feeling. Martin James shook himself awake, took off his blanket, and started the engine so that he could run the heater. He'd driven up the mountain late last night, after convincing himself that trying to see Samantha would do no good. He thought he knew her well enough to know that when she'd left him after their confrontation with Gwendolyn James in the Apple House, she wouldn't want to see him for a while, if at all. When he tried to look at it from her point of view, he could see that she had more than enough reasons to be angry with him. First, as it had emerged when Gwendolyn had started to question him, he hadn't told her about the shooting, or why he'd gone to see Merlin Griffiths. Neither had he mentioned his visits to Wyndham Spencer James or Fionn Roberts. That was why now he had to take things slowly. There would be a lot to talk about. Eventually. A bird broke cover from the trees farther down. He didn't recognize it. A small bird, not a hawk. From behind him came the sound of sheep as the light rose. Despite the fact that he was stiff from sleeping in the Land Rover and that he needed the heater to keep warm, he was glad that he had come. There was a clarity up here on the mountain that he couldn't achieve in the house, even though it wasn't that far away. He'd forgotten how isolated it could be up here, how quiet. He knew that in a little while he would begin the descent down to Plas Wern Las, which was less than a mile away. But for now, he was happy enough with the cold, with the comparative silence. He'd wanted Samantha, and he'd got her. And he wanted more. And when he had to watch her walk out of the door of the Apple House, he'd felt something that was like a constriction. He hadn't been able to show anything. Certainly not in front of Gwendolyn James or his sergeant. It would have been like admitting a weakness. If he'd behaved awkwardly after she'd walked out, then he'd just have to accept it. And so would they. After all, they hadn't exactly been the epitome of politeness themselves, had they? Certainly not Gwendolyn, who seemed to carry around the rough edges of resentment with him. The sergeant had been better. At least he'd seemed to like Samantha. He found himself putting in the clutch reluctantly. It was certainly time to move, but he found himself hanging on to the moment. He'd been on the mountain for hours, and now he needed some breakfast. He engaged first gear and edged the Land Rover slowly down the track. He had no idea he was about to encounter a second body. Marion Keynes was in the main kitchen when he arrived. It was still early, and there was no sign of anyone else. She was wearing a black robe of some shiny material, and her hair was pinned up. She had no makeup on, and he was surprised at how attractive she looked as she turned towards him as he came in. "You're up early?" It seemed so obvious that Martin didn't know what to say. It was not about her to tell her that he and Samantha had had a disagreement the day before, or anything about the reason. "Coffee?" He nodded and joined her at the filter machine, which was placed on the work unit which ran along the back wall of the kitchen. "It was a donation," she said, as she handed him a cup she'd filled from the carafe. "From an admirer." "I'm not surprised," he said, taking the cup and the small jug of cream that lay on the counter next to the machine. "Not me, silly. Of the work we do here." It was the first time she'd ever been remotely flirtatious with him, and he wondered about it, coming quickly to the conclusion that he'd been the one to give the first cue. "You went to the tantric exhibition," he said. "In Carmarthen." "Too interpretive for me," she said. "Too free-form. At bottom, I'm a literalist." "Which is why you'd like a lease," he said. Then he sipped his coffee. "I think you know that," she said, changing her tone suddenly. "There's no point in trying to talk about that today. I've got to get to the station. I have an old friend coming. She's been staying in Swansea overnight. Jane Merriam, Samantha's mother." Martin couldn't explain why it hit him so hard, but it did. Of course he'd known that Samantha had a mother. But ever since he'd known her, the concentration had been on her relationship with her father. That was where the problems had seemed to be. "We were in college together," Marion Keynes explained. "We shared a flat in Chalk Farm, a very long time ago." "I didn't know." "No reason why you should," Marion Keynes said. But she was too offhand about it. Martin wondered if she knew more than she was letting on about his relationship with Samantha, and whether this visit was an attempt to interfere. "She's coming in on an early train," Marion Keynes said. "She's only here for a couple of days, and we want to make the most of it." Martin didn't feel the need to say anything. He drank some more coffee, and he watched Marion Keynes leave the kitchen and turned left towards the front of the house. Then he heard the scream. It was an awful, high-pitched sound that somehow seemed near and far away at the same time. It had a terrifying quality that seemed to reverberate against the back of his skull despite the distance. He spilled some coffee, and then he began to run. He found Marion Keynes standing in the drawing room, where they kept the tatami mats. She stood there as if she was fixed to the spot, and she kept on screaming. There was blood in a thick pool in front of her, and more blood led to a huddled and battered shape in front of the large Georgian window. Queenie Rogers was dead. There was a bloody mess where her head should have been, and her facial tattoos were covered in the same congealed substance. She lay there on the floor like a broken doll. Her head was thrown back at a peculiar angle, despite the fact that her body was gathered forward in an odd, almost protective movement that must have been her last. An axe, obviously the murder weapon, lay discarded to the right of the body. He knew that his Aunt Henrietta had been found in just this position over 50 years previously. Martin James knew this consciously, and he was unable to do anything about it. Just as he was unable to do anything about Marion Keynes' screaming. It was a long, frozen moment in which he seemed to take in everything. The morning light just beginning to come in through the window, the plaster patch on the ceiling, the thin layers of dust on the black marble fireplace. He took it all in and fixed it in his memory, and then he took hold of Marion Keynes and slapped her. That must have been about the same time that David Young and Samantha Merriam appeared in the doorway. He was partly dressed in t-shirt and sweatpants. She was wearing a dark blue velour dressing gown. David Young said, "Christ." His voice was strangely flat. "Help," Samantha Merriam said. "Take care of Marion," Martin said to David Young as he moved towards the door. His eyes caught Samantha's as he went. Not much passed between them. He went into Marion Keynes' office and he called the emergency number. And when they put him through, he felt a sense of relief. They told him not to touch anything, and then he went back into the drawing room and told the others the same thing. Somehow, he managed to shepherd them out of there and into the kitchen and away from the body. He put the kettle on, and when it boiled, he made a large pot of tea. They sat on stools in front of a large refectory table. Oh my God, Marion Keynes kept on saying. The others didn't say anything. Twice, Martin looked at Samantha for a flicker of a shared moment. There was no response. He wondered how long it would take before the police arrived.